They say you never truly know someone until you see what they do when they think you're dead. I learned that lesson 30 feet below the surface of the Atlantic, watching my husband and his mother toast champagne on the deck above me. My name is Elena Vance, and I built a $3 billion biotech empire from nothing. I started in a cramped lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts, working 18-hour days with equipment I'd bought secondhand on Craigslist. 10 years later, Vance Biogen had a gleaming headquarters in Boston's Innovation District, 200 employees, and patents that could change the future of medicine. I could synthesize complex proteins that most researchers only dreamed about. I could predict market trends 3 years out. I could negotiate with venture capitalists who'd made grown men cry. But apparently, I couldn't see that the man sleeping next to me every night was planning my murder. The water off the Florida Keys is deceptively beautiful. Crystal blue, warm, inviting. The kind of water you see in travel magazines, where happy couples sip mojitos and plan their futures. Julian had suggested this trip to celebrate our 5th anniversary. A week on the Serenity, his family's yacht, cruising the islands. Just the two of us, he'd said. Quality time away from the stress of running the company. I should have known something was wrong when his mother Genevieve invited herself along at the last minute. That woman never did anything without calculation. At 65, she still held court in the Hamptons like some kind of displaced duchess, wearing her late husband's money like armor and treating anyone who'd earned their own fortune with barely concealed contempt. She'd made it clear from day one that I wasn't good enough for her son. Too new money, too self-made, too hungry for success in a way that made her uncomfortable. I'd convinced myself I could win her over. 5 years of perfectly chosen gifts, of biting my tongue at family dinners when she made cutting remarks about my background, of trying to be the daughter-in-law she wanted. 5 years of watching Julian make excuses for her, promising it would get better, asking me to be patient just a little longer. The first hint that something was catastrophically wrong came 3 months before the yacht trip. I'd been working late at the office, reviewing quarterly reports, when I noticed an irregularity in our personal accounts. $15 million had been moved, quietly, in increments small enough that our accountant might not notice immediately. The transfers went to an offshore account I'd never seen before. I'd confronted Julian that night in our penthouse on Fisher Island. He'd had this look on his face, this micro-expression of panic that lasted maybe half a second before his features smoothed into concern. He'd kissed my forehead and told me he was moving funds around for a real estate investment. His college roommate was developing properties in Austin. Good opportunity, he'd meant to tell me. I'd wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored every instinct screaming that something was wrong. I'd built my entire career on reading people, on seeing patterns others missed. But when it came to my own husband, I'd been willfully blind. The day it happened, we'd been cruising off Marathon, about 20 miles from shore. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked almost artificial. Genevieve was in the salon below, supposedly taking a nap. Julian had suggested we go up to the bow together, watch the sunset with some champagne. It was romantic. It was perfect. I remember the exact moment everything changed. I was standing at the railing, watching a pod of dolphins in the distance, when Julian came up behind me. I thought he was going to put his arms around my waist like he used to when we were first dating. Instead, I felt his hand on my head. The words he said are burned into my memory forever. Consider this my hostile takeover. Then he slammed my head into the railing. Not hard enough to knock me out, just enough to disorient me, to make the world tilt and blur. I felt his hands on my back, and then I was falling. The water hit me like a wall. Cold, despite the tropical temperature. Shocking. I went under, the weight of my silk blouse and linen pants dragging me down. My lungs burned. My head throbbed. Somewhere in the primitive part of my brain, a voice was screaming about bull sharks, about the dangerous currents in this area, about how far we were from shore. I fought my way to the surface, gasping, treading water. I looked up at the Serenity, maybe 30 yards away now, already moving. Julian and Genevieve stood on the deck, watching me. I'll never forget the image. Julian looked almost sad, like he was putting down a sick dog. But Genevieve, she just raised her champagne glass in a little salute, a gesture of victory, of contempt. Then they turned away, and the yacht's engines roared louder. They were leaving me to die. The rational part of my brain, the CEO part that had navigated hostile board meetings and cutthroat negotiations, kicked into gear. I couldn't panic. Panic would kill me faster than the sharks. I shrugged off my blouse, kicked off my sandals. The sun was setting, which meant I had maybe an hour of good light left. I knew the currents here could be vicious. I knew that even strong swimmers could get disoriented and swim in circles until exhaustion took them. But I also knew that I hadn't survived foster care, hadn't put myself through MIT on scholarships and spite, hadn't built a $1 billion company from scratch, just to die because my husband was a greedy coward. I floated on my back, conserving energy, trying to remember the navigation charts I'd seen. We'd been heading southeast. The current was pulling me, but which way? I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. In business, I'd always been good at seeing the bigger picture, at understanding systems. The ocean was just another system. I don't know how long I was in the water before I heard the boat engine. It sounded different from the Serenity's deep rumble. Smaller, older. I started waving my arms, shouting, praying I wasn't imagining it in my oxygen-deprived delirium. The fishing boat that pulled up beside me was called Maria Elena, painted blue and white, rust showing through in patches. Two men leaned over the side, both in their 50s, weather-worn faces showing surprise. The older one, Carlos, grabbed my arm and hauled me aboard with surprising strength. His brother Miguel wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and pushed a bottle of water into my hands. They didn't ask many questions, just looked at my face, at the bruise already forming on my forehead, at my expensive jewelry and designer pants, and seemed to understand that something very bad had happened. Carlos just asked, "You need hospital or you need not to be found?" The answer came to me with perfect clarity. Not to be found. Not yet. They nodded and changed course, heading toward Marathon instead of Key West. Miguel offered me his phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial, but I managed. The first call was to Marcus Thorne. Mark had been my head of security for 3 years, ex-FBI from their cybercrimes division. He'd seen things in his career that would make most people need therapy. Nothing rattled him. When he answered, I said 2 words. Code Phoenix. There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, then his voice came back steady and cold. Understood. Systems locked. Team is moving. Where are you? Marathon. I'll text coordinates. Mark, they tried to kill me. I know. We're already on it. Of course he knew. Mark always knew. The second call was to Sofia Reyes in Miami. Sofia was the kind of lawyer other lawyers had nightmares about. She'd earned her nickname, the Shark, by destroying opponents so thoroughly they wished they'd never set foot in a courtroom. Sophia, I need you to freeze every asset Julian and Genevieve Croft have access to, right now. The charges are attempted murder and large-scale fraud. Already working on it, honey. Mark called me 5 minutes ago. I've got emergency injunctions being filed as we speak. Are you safe? Getting there. How fast can you get to the Keys? I can be in Marathon in 90 minutes. There's a private dock at mile marker 50. Text me when you're close. The third call was to Lena Petrova, my best friend and chief R&D officer. Lena was brilliant, abrasive, and absolutely ruthless when someone threatened the people she cared about. She answered on the first ring. Elena, Mark said code Phoenix. Tell me you're alive and I'm not about to commit multiple felonies for revenge. I'm alive. Lena, I need you in Key Largo. Bring the emergency kit and a clean car. No one can know I'm back yet. On my way. Elena, I'm going to kill them myself. Get in line. Carlos and Miguel dropped me at a quiet dock near mile marker 48, refusing the money I tried to give them. Carlos just squeezed my shoulder and said, Go get them, senora. Men like that, they think women are weak. Show them different. Lena was waiting in a nondescript Honda, her usually wild red hair pulled back, face grim. She handed me dry clothes, a burner phone, and a laptop as I climbed in. No hugs, no crying. That would come later. Right now, we had work to do. Where are we going? I asked, peeling off my wet clothes in the back seat. Brickell. We've got a safe property there. Penthouse, top floor, registered under a shell company. I've been stalking it for the last hour. Mark's people are already setting up equipment. The drive to Miami took 2 hours. Lena filled me in on what they'd discovered so far. Mark's team had hacked into the Serenity's navigation system and tracked its current position. They'd also pulled the boat's internal camera feeds for the last week. Julian and Genevieve had been careful, but not careful enough. There were recordings of them discussing the plan, talking about how to split my assets after I was declared dead. By the time we reached the penthouse in Brickell's financial district, my shock was crystallizing into something much colder, much more dangerous. The penthouse was exactly what we needed. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the Miami skyline, but with blackout shades for privacy. The main room had been converted into a command center. Computer monitors covered one wall, showing financial data, GPS tracking, news feeds, and security camera footage. Mark stood in the center of it all, 3 of his team members working at laptops around him. He turned when I walked in, and I saw something flicker in his usually impassive face. Relief, maybe. "You look terrible," he said. "I've had better days. Show me what you've got." For the next 6 hours, we worked. Mark's investigation went far beyond the $15 million Julian had stolen. He'd found evidence of contact with a fixer in New Orleans, a man named Rousseau, who specialized in making people disappear and forging death certificates. Julian had paid him $200,000 3 weeks ago. They'd found emails, burner phone records, everything we needed to prove premeditation. But it got worse. Much worse. Mark pulled up a file on Genevieve that made my blood run cold. We started digging into her background. Elena, I think she killed her husband. Thomas Croft, Julian's father, had died of a heart attack 10 years ago at the age of 62. Sudden, unexpected, but not unheard of in a man with his lifestyle. Except Mark had tracked down the doctor who'd signed the death certificate. Dr. Raymond Foster had retired 6 months after Thomas's death and moved to Costa Rica. Very suddenly, very quietly, and his retirement account had received a deposit of $500,000 from an untraceable source right before he left. "There's more," Mark continued. "Julian had a sister, Clara. She was 23 when she disappeared during a trip to Europe 7 years ago. The family reported her missing. There was a brief investigation, but it went nowhere. She was declared dead after the standard waiting period." "She knew something," I said quietly. "Didn't she?" "We think so. We're checking property records, looking for anywhere Genevieve might have had access to. If Clara is dead, if Genevieve had her killed, there might be evidence." I looked at the screens, at all the data flowing past, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice for Clara, for Thomas, for everyone Genevieve had destroyed in her quest for wealth and control. Sophia arrived around midnight, carrying a briefcase and looking like she was ready for war. "I've got good news and better news. Good news. I filed emergency injunctions freezing all of Julian's accounts and Genevieve's trust funds. They can't access a penny. Better news? I've been in contact with the FBI. They're very interested in your case, especially given Mark's findings about Genevieve." "How long before they try to run?" I asked. "They already tried. Mark's people flagged their passports an hour ago. They're trapped in the country. And Elena, they think you're dead. Julian filed a missing person report this evening from Key West. Said you'd fallen overboard during a sunset cruise, and they'd searched for hours but couldn't find you. The Coast Guard is currently running a search and rescue operation." I felt a savage satisfaction at that. Let them think I'm dead a little longer. I want to see their faces when I come back. We spent the next 2 days building our case. Mark's team worked around the clock, and what they uncovered was staggering. Genevieve had been running cons for decades. She'd married Thomas for his money, then slowly isolated him from his friends and family. There were records of her controlling his medication, of her firing nurses who asked too many questions. When Thomas had started talking about changing his will to give Clara a larger share, he'd died within a month. Clara had suspected. She'd started asking questions, digging into her father's death. That's when she'd taken that trip to Europe, telling friends she needed to get away and think. She'd never made it back. Mark's contacts in law enforcement, people he'd worked with during his FBI days, helped us trace property records. Genevieve owned a small piece of land in rural Connecticut, inherited from a distant relative. It was remote, undeveloped, the kind of place no one would think to look. Mark passed the information to his FBI contacts, and they sent a team. They found Clara's remains buried 6 feet down, wrapped in plastic, alongside evidence that she'd been drugged before being killed. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead about 7 years. My rage at that discovery was so intense I couldn't speak for almost an hour. This woman, this monster, had killed her own stepdaughter and had been living free, throwing parties in the Hamptons, looking down on people like me. On the third day, Sophia looked up from her laptop and smiled. "It's time. I've coordinated with the FBI and the Miami PD. They're ready to move when we are. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget." Julian and Genevieve were staying at my penthouse on Fisher Island. Of course they were. They probably thought they owned it now. Mark's security feeds showed them drinking my wine, sleeping in my bed, going through my things like vultures picking at a corpse. We planned the confrontation carefully. Mark and his team would disable the penthouse's security system remotely, giving us access. Sophia would coordinate with the authorities waiting outside, and I would walk in like a ghost and watch them realize their mistake. Fisher Island was accessible only by private ferry, which made it perfect for trapping them. At 8 p.m., exactly as planned, Mark triggered the security override. Every light in the penthouse went dark. The backup generator would kick in after 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds would feel like an eternity to the people inside. I stood in the private elevator with Mark, my heart pounding but my hands steady. When the doors opened into the penthouse foyer, the emergency lights had just activated, casting everything in an eerie blue-white glow. I could hear voices from the living room, Genevieve's cultured tones, sharp with irritation. "Julian, what's wrong with the power?" "I don't know, Mother. The backup should have come on already." "Well, call someone. This is unacceptable." I walked into the living room, Mark a silent shadow behind me. They were standing by the windows, silhouetted against the Miami skyline. Julian had a phone in his hand. Genevieve was holding a glass of what looked like my 30-year-old scotch. "I wouldn't bother calling," I said. "The system is working exactly as designed." The effect was instantaneous and deeply satisfying. Julian's phone clattered to the floor. Genevieve's face went sheet white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stared at me like I was a hallucination, their worst nightmare made flesh. Julian found his voice first. "No, that's not possible. You're dead. You drowned." "Is that what you told yourself? Did it help you sleep at night in my bed?" Genevieve recovered faster, her face hardening into its usual mask of disdain. "How dare you break into this property? I'll call the police." "Please do. They're already on their way." Mark moved to the entertainment center and connected his tablet to the massive TV mounted on the wall. With a few taps, the screen lit up with a map showing the Florida Keys, a red X marking the exact spot where Julian had pushed me overboard. "Let me show you what we've been working on," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. "Mark, if you would." The map was replaced by audio visualizer bars, and then Julian's voice filled the room. "Are you sure about this? What if someone sees?" That was from 2 days before the trip. Genevieve's reply was crisp and certain. "No one will see. The boat's crew is dismissed for the week. It will look like a tragic accident. The poor woman fell overboard while drunk. So sad. So preventable. And the money? Once she's declared dead, as her husband, you'll inherit everything. We'll have controlling interest in Vance Biogen, and we can finally sell it to Helix Corp like we planned. $3 billion, Julian. Think of what we can do with that. We can restore the family to its proper place. I watched the color drain from Julian's face as he heard his own voice plotting my death. Where did you get that? You really should check your jewelry more carefully, I said. That antique stick pin you wore to the yacht club last month? The one I had restored for your birthday? Mark's people modified it. You've been wearing a wire for weeks. Mark pulled up another file. Financial records showing the transfer to the New Orleans fixer. Emails discussing the plan. Text messages between Julian and Genevieve coordinating timing. And then, the final piece. This one's my favorite, Mark said, pulling up footage from the Serenity's own security cameras. The angle showed the bow clearly. Me standing at the railing. Julian approaching. The moment he grabbed my head and slammed it into the railing before pushing me over. Genevieve watching from the salon window, champagne glass already in hand. The ghost you made is back to collect her debts, I said quietly. Julian suddenly lunged at me, his face twisted with panic and rage. Mark moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, stepping between us and redirecting Julian's momentum into a perfect takedown. Within seconds, Julian was face down on my Italian marble floor, Mark's knee on his back, hands zip-tied behind him. FBI, don't move! The shout came from the foyer as agents flooded into the penthouse, followed by Miami PD officers. Sophia walked in behind them, looking supremely satisfied. Genevieve Croft, Julian Croft, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, wire fraud, and money laundering, the lead FBI agent announced. You have the right to remain silent. Genevieve tried to maintain her dignity as they handcuffed her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. This is a mistake. Our lawyers will have us out by morning. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, we do, the agent replied. We're also arresting you in connection with the murders of Thomas Croft and Clara Croft. We found the body, Mrs. Croft. We know everything. That's when Genevieve's composure finally cracked. Just for a moment, I saw raw terror in her face before she schooled it back into haughty indifference. But it was too late. Everyone had seen it. As they led Julian and Genevieve away, Julian turned back to look at me. Elena, please. I'm sorry. She made me do it. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything you say ever again, I replied. Enjoy prison. The trial became a media sensation. Sophia worked with federal prosecutors to build a RICO case, treating the Crofts' activities as organized crime. The evidence was overwhelming. Julian, facing life in prison, took a plea deal. He testified against Genevieve in exchange for a reduced sentence, admitting everything. How his mother had poisoned his father slowly over months, using medication that mimicked a heart attack. How she'd hired someone to kill Clara when the girl had gotten too suspicious. How Genevieve had planned my murder down to the last detail, seeing me as both an obstacle and an opportunity. The most damning evidence came from Clara herself. Before her death, she'd installed hidden cameras in her mother's house, the kind used for home security. The footage had been uploading to a cloud storage account no one knew about. When investigators found it, they discovered a recording of Genevieve admitting to killing Thomas, talking to herself in what she thought was privacy. At the sentencing hearing, I sat in the front row and watched justice unfold. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen it all, but even she seemed disgusted by what she'd heard during the trial. Genevieve Croft, you have been found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, multiple counts of fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence presented in this case reveals a pattern of manipulation, cruelty, and calculated violence that spans decades. You showed no remorse for your victims, no conscience, no humanity. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each murder count, to be served consecutively. You will die in prison, Mrs. Croft, and that is far more mercy than you showed your victims. Genevieve's mask finally shattered. She turned to look at me, her face contorted with rage, and screamed, "You should have drowned, you gutter rat! You're nothing! You came from nothing!" The outburst was captured by every news camera in the courtroom. The image of the formerly elegant Hampton socialite, now revealed as a monster, shrieking insults while being restrained by bailiffs, went viral within hours. Her carefully constructed image of refinement and class was destroyed in a single moment of lost control. Julian received 20 years for his cooperation. As they led him away, he looked smaller somehow, diminished. The charming man I'd thought I married had never really existed, but the legal victory was only the beginning of my revenge. Sophia and I used every legal tool available to dismantle what remained of the Croft fortune. Their assets were seized to pay restitution. The family's estate in Connecticut, the grand house Genevieve had been so proud of, went up for auction. I bought it for a fraction of its value. Then I donated it to a nonprofit that supported victims of domestic violence and renamed it the Clara Croft Memorial Center. I made sure the press covered the opening ceremony. I made sure Genevieve, in her prison cell, would know that her family home was now a sanctuary for the very people she'd looked down on her entire life. Her legacy was being erased and replaced with something good, something that actually helped people. The Hampton set that had once fawned over Genevieve now pretended they'd never known her. Invitations dried up. People who'd attended her parties for decades suddenly couldn't remember her name. Social death is real in those circles, and Genevieve had fallen as far as it was possible to fall. I threw myself back into work at Vance Biogen. The company had been built on my vision, my research, my leadership, and it had survived the chaos. If anything, the publicity had helped. Investors saw how I'd fought back, how I'd refused to be a victim, and they wanted to be associated with that strength. We secured 2 major contracts within 6 months of the trial ending. But I also learned to live differently. I promoted Lena to COO and started delegating more. I took actual vacations. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, because surviving attempted murder leaves scars that don't show on the surface. Mark stayed on as head of security, but he also became a close friend. So did Sophia, who would fly up from Miami every few weeks for what she called girl time, but was really just an excuse to drink good wine and make sure I was okay. 3 years after the trial, I stood on the deck of a new yacht. I'd named it the Phoenix, because some symbolism was too perfect to resist. We were cruising along the California coast near Big Sur, the cliffs rising dramatic and beautiful on our right, the Pacific stretching endless on our left. Lena was sprawled on a deck chair, reading a scientific journal, and occasionally making derisive comments about the methodology. Mark was at the helm, having discovered an unexpected love of sailing. Sophia was on a video call, negotiating some deal that would probably make her client another few $1,000,000. And I was free. Genevieve died in prison 2 years after her sentencing. A heart attack, ironically. No one claimed her body. She was cremated by the state and her ashes disposed of with no ceremony, no mourners, no mark to show she'd ever existed. The papers barely mentioned it. Julian was released after 15 years for good behavior. He was 51 years old, broke, and unemployable. His name was poison in every social circle that mattered. The last I heard, he was working at a car dealership in Cleveland, living in a small apartment, alone. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about that night on the yacht, about the choice that destroyed his life. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. I learned several important lessons from my ordeal. Trust is earned, not given. Love without respect is worthless, and you can survive anything if you refuse to let it break you. But the most important lesson was this. They tried to drown me in the ocean, but they didn't know I was made of storms. They thought they could erase me, take what I'd built, and move on as if I'd never existed. They were wrong. The sweetest revenge isn't watching your enemies fall. It's standing on the ashes of their schemes and building an empire even greater than before. It's living well, living fully, living on your own terms. It's knowing that while they rot in cells or struggle in obscurity, you're sailing into a sunset on a boat named after your own resurrection. I rebuilt Vance Biogen into something even more powerful than before. We've developed treatments that are saving lives, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in medicine. I've mentored dozens of young scientists, especially women from backgrounds like mine, who need someone to believe in them. I've funded scholarships, supported research, and used my wealth to make the world genuinely better. That's my legacy. Not the money, not the company, not even the justice I fought for. My legacy is proving that you can come from nothing, survive everything, and still become someone who matters. Someone who builds instead of destroys. Someone who lifts others up instead of crushing them. As I stood on the deck of the Phoenix, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I thought about the woman who'd fallen into the water 3 years ago. Scared, betrayed, fighting for her life. She'd been strong, but she hadn't known how strong. I'd like to think she'd be proud of who I became. The wind picked up, filling the sails, pushing us forward. Lena looked up from her journal and smiled. Thinking deep thoughts? Just reflecting on the journey. Well, stop it. You're getting maudlin. Mark, turn this boat around. We're going back to that restaurant in Monterey, the one with the amazing seafood. The one where you insulted the chef's molecular gastronomy and he threatened to ban you, Mark called back. He ended up offering me a job, didn't he? That's basically friendship. I laughed, really laughed, in a way I hadn't been able to for years. This was my life now. Not perfect, but genuine. Not without scars, but healing. Not the fairy tale I'd once imagined, but something better. Something real. They'd tried to write my ending, tried to make me disappear beneath the waves, but I'd written my own story instead. A story of survival, justice, and rebuilding. A story that would outlive them all. And as the phoenix cut through the water, carrying me toward whatever came next, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd never be anyone's victim again. I was Elena Vance, survivor, fighter, builder of empires. This was my legacy, earned in blood and salt water, forged in betrayal and reborn in fire. And no one would ever take it from me again.